All right, so welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're going back in time, back to the mid-1800s, to a place where architecture, they thought, had the power to heal. We're talking about the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum in Weston, West Virginia. It's a national historic landmark, and it has a story that's as complex as the grounds.
Really a remarkable structure, isn't it? Built during a pivotal time in American history, when the understanding and treatment of mental illness were going through a huge transformation.
And you know me, I love digging into the details. I was looking at the asylum's website, and it's just packed with information. Civil War raids, a gold robbery. It's like straight out of a movie. But what really caught my eye was this concept called the Kirkbride Plan. It guided the asylum's design. It was this idea that the building could actually help heal the patients.
The Kirkbride Plan, developed by Dr. Thomas Kirkbride, it was, well, revolutionary. For asylum design in the 19th century, Kirkbride believed that space and light, ventilation, and a nice-looking setting were important. For a therapeutic environment, he envisioned these asylums as these retreats, almost like a sanatorium, where they could recover in a peaceful and uplifting setting.
So instead of just locking people away, they were trying to make a space to actually help them get better. That's pretty forward thinking back then, huh?
Oh, absolutely. The Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, with its, striking Gothic architecture and the big grounds, perfectly shows this philosophy. The building itself was a therapeutic tool, imagine. Soaring ceilings, long corridors with tons of light, views of the countryside. Quite a contrast from the dark, cramped conditions you usually think of.
Yeah. It's amazing how they put all of these design elements together with this belief that it could really impact their well-being. Speaking of people, the website mentioned Dorothea Dix. She was a huge advocate for the mentally ill. Her work was key in getting the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum built, right?
Dorothea Dix was a force to be reckoned with, really. She traveled all over the country, documenting the often awful conditions where people with mental illnesses were housed. And because of her, tons of asylums were created, including the one we're talking about.
It's inspiring to see someone so dedicated to helping others, especially when mental illness was so misunderstood and stigmatized. It sounds like the asylum had a good start, with intentions to give care and support to those who needed it.
Yeah, for sure. It represented a shift in thinking about mental health, moving away from just isolating people to creating environments to promote healing.
But the website also mentions some dramatic things that happened at the asylum, Civil War raids, and even a gold robbery. Not really the peaceful retreat Kirkbride had in mind, is it?
Unfortunately, yeah. The asylum's history is tied to some rough times in American history, especially the Civil War. It really had a big impact on institutions like this.
About those Civil War raids, I'm picturing something straight out of a history book. Were those common at asylums?
Well, remember that West Virginia was born out of the Civil War. It split from Virginia to join the Union in 1863, and the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, being in this new state, got caught in the middle. Both the Union and Confederate forces were there at times, disrupting things and putting a strain on everything.
This has been such a crazy and uncertain time for the staff and the patients. And then, on top of the war, there's this mysterious gold robbery. Now, that's a story I need to hear more about.
Well, the details about it are a little fuzzy. It's a mix of history and local legend. They think that a bunch of gold, meant for Confederate payroll, was kept at the asylum at some point during the war. And of course, this attracted some unwanted attention. And, well, you can guess what happened next.
Sounds like something straight out of a mystery novel. It's amazing how this one place has so much history, architectural innovation, social reform, Civil War drama, and even treasure hunting.
Yeah, it really is. The Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. A remarkable example of a place where the past and present meet. It gives us a look into a past era, while also making us think about how we deal with mental health care today.
Speaking of today, did you know they offer all kinds of tours and events? Ghost hunts, historical tours, a fall festival, even an asylum ball. Seems like they're really into the unique history of this place.
It is interesting, isn't it, how places like this have become such popular attractions. It shows just how fascinated we are with the past, especially when it involves some mystery or the macabre.
And if anyone's thinking of visiting, the season starts soon, March 29th, 2025. All the info's on their website.
Before we jump ahead to today, though, I think it's important to look more at the asylum's later years. Even though the Kirkbride Plan was groundbreaking, the story of the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum isn't all good.
That's a good point. I'm curious about how the treatments changed over time and how those changes affected the asylum and its patients.
Well, that's a perfect way to move into part 2 of our deep dive. Join us as we explore the later parts of the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum story and uncover some of the more challenging parts of its past. Welcome back. As we look more at the latter part of the 19th century and into the 20th century, we start to see a change in mental health care. The Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, like a lot of other places like it, face growing challenges.
You mentioned before that the asylum's story wasn't all good. I want to learn more about those challenges. What happened to all that optimism about the Kirkbride plan and its potential for healing?
Well, the Kirkbride plan, while innovative, was a product of its time. It really relied on the treatments they were using. And those treatments changed a lot as we learned more about mental illness. Unfortunately, some of those treatments, well, they weren't so good.
You're probably talking about things like lobotomies and electroshock therapy. Those are tough to think about, especially because the asylum had such good intentions at the start.
You're right, they did use those procedures at different points in the asylum's history, often with really bad and permanent consequences. Well, it reminds us how far we've come in treating mental illness, but it also makes us think about the mistakes we made along the way. It's important to remember, these procedures were considered cutting edge at the time, even though we know now that they were really flawed and harmful.
It's hard to believe that they ever thought those were okay. What led them to even try those things in the first place?
A lot of things came together to lead to those treatments. We still didn't understand much about mental illness. Add to that the overcrowding, limited resources, and a growing desperation to find something that worked. It made a situation where these radical things seemed like real options, even though they weren't based on good science and were really risky.
Overcrowding seems to be a big problem in the history of these asylums. Didn't we say that the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum was designed for way fewer people than it ended up having?
Right. It was designed for 250 patients. But at its busiest time, in the early 1900s, it had over 2,400 people. Imagine the stress that put on the staff, resources, and the quality of care. The asylum, which was supposed to be this safe haven, was way too full. It became almost impossible to give the individual attention and the right environment that Kirkbride wanted.
It's sad to think about what those patients went through. It seems like a far cry from the peaceful place that the Kirkbride plan was about. It seems like things had to change.
And they did, though it was slow, and often happened because the public was upset about how bad these places were. The mid-20th century saw new medicines and a move towards deinstitutionalization, the idea that people with mental illness would be better off in their communities rather than in big, isolated places.
So did those new medicines and the move to community care lead to the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum closing?
They were definitely part of it. The Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum officially closed in 1994. After over 130 years, it was the end of an era, not just for this place, but for how we thought about mental health care for so long.
It must have been a complicated feeling. On the one hand, it was good that the old system was gone. But on the other hand, it was sad to lose a place. That, even with its problems, meant so much to so many people.
It was a complex time, for sure. There was a feeling of relief that they were finally doing something about how bad the conditions were. But there were also worries about whether community care was ready to take care of all the patients. Coming out of these places, it's a discussion we're still having today. People are still fighting for better mental health services.
It shows that even though the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum is closed, we're still talking about how we take care of people with mental illness. It seems like its story is important even today.
Absolutely. By understanding what we did right and wrong in the past, we can figure out how to do better in the future. And that brings us to part 3 of our deep dive. We'll explore the legacy of the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum and what we can learn from its history. Welcome back. For the last part of our look at the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum,
We've covered a lot, from the hopeful start, with the Kirkbride plan, to the tougher times it went through. What a journey.
it really shows how much our ideas about mental health care have changed and how those changes can be seen in places like this one.
Now that the asylum's closed, and it's a historical site, it makes me think, what can we learn from it? How can we use those lessons to make mental health care better today?
That's the big question. The Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum shows us that good intentions aren't always enough. We have to keep looking at how we approach mental health care, making sure it's based on science and focuses on people's well-being and dignity.
We talked about overcrowding and not enough resources, problems that are still around today. What can we do about them?
First, mental health funding has to be a priority. We need enough resources to give good care, support research, and make sure people have access to different treatment options.
It's easy to say we need more money, but how do we actually get it? It seems like mental health is often forgotten when it comes to budgets.
You're right, it's a constant fight. We have to push for policy changes, raise awareness, And make sure our leaders are investing in these services. We also need to fight the stigma around mental illness, which keeps people from getting help and contributes to not having enough funding.
About that stigma, what do you think about the asylum being a tourist attraction now, with ghost hunts and tours and even a ball? Is there a chance that this makes light of what the patients went through?
It's a good question. It's about finding a balance between remembering history and being respectful. It's important to tell the asylum story honestly, the good and the bad. It's a chance to teach people about how mental health care has changed and to help them understand what people with mental illness have gone through.
It seems like these historical sites can remind us that we need to keep talking about mental health. They connect us to the past and make us think about how to make things better in the future.
Exactly. By looking at what we did wrong and right in the past, we can figure out how to create a better system for everyone.
I keep thinking about Dorothea Dix and all her work to help people with mental illness. What do you think she would say about mental health care today?
That's an interesting thought. I think she'd be happy with how far we've come, but also worried about the problems that are still here. We know a lot more about mental illness now and have better treatments, but the stigma is still there, and a lot of people can't get the care they need.
It reminds us that we still have work to do to make sure everyone has access to mental health care.
Absolutely. But by learning from the past, trying new things, and fighting for change, we can create a world where everyone can live a good life, no matter their mental health challenges.
Well said. That's a great way to end our deep dive into the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. Thanks for joining us. It's been a fascinating look at history and how we think about mental health care. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to today's podcast. The West Virginia Media Lab is all about celebrating our state and its people, businesses, stories, news, and folklore. If you love West Virginia like we do, be sure to comment below, then subscribe, like, and hit the notification bell to stay connected. Until next time, stay wild, wonderful, West Virginia.